Steve, for coming. So in this session, we're going to be talking about the government's semiconductor strategy, which I have in my hands here, which was published in May after extensive collaboration between industry and government. So we have an excellent panel lined up for you. So I'll do some introductions first, and we'll get straight into the session. So first of all, we have Sarge Hook. Sarge leads Plexal's innovation team and specializes in building collaborative ecosystems between startups, governments, industry, and academia to solve technical problems. He's a member of HMG's National Cyber Advisory Board, chaired by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and his previous roles include an eclectic mix of consulting, startups, and military experience. Next, we have Stephen Pattison, Head of Global Public Affairs for Arm. He's been there for 10 years, and he's been dealing with policies and governments in the UK, US, China, and the EU. He's also worked on geopolitics, AI and ethics, digital security, and export controls. He says that's his regular diet. Weird man. Previously, he worked for James Dyson, again, also weird. And before that, he was a British diplomat with postings to Washington, Warsaw, and Nicosia. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you. And last but not least, I have Charles Sturman to my left, who's the CEO at Techworks. Charles drives collaboration between deep tech and semiconductor companies, academia, and government in order to promote the sector and grow business opportunities for UK companies. He had previous executive roles, business development, corporate strategy, go-to-market, and new business venturing at HiSilicon, uBlocks, Arm, and Motorola. And he has extensive tech experience. So we have gathered a very, very high-quality panel for you today to talk about the government's semiconductor strategy. So first question, Sarge. How important are semiconductors to the UK's success as a tech sector overall?
I mean, it's absolutely critical. So obviously, semiconductors underpin all of key technologies. And I'm just checking, can you hear me? Yeah, good. And, you know, it's one of the 5 science and tech priorities that the UK government set out. Our sector as a whole is worth over $1 trillion. It's the 3rd largest tech sector in the world. So as a nation, we certainly punch above our weight. But really, I guess if you kind of step back from that from a more philosophical sense, this morning, actually, I was with my son. He was poorly. I had a bit of a stressful morning getting here to drop him to my parents to look after him. And I said, I'm really sorry that I can't look after you today. I've got something that I absolutely can't miss. I need to go and obviously speak here. And he obviously inevitably, as an 8-year-old does, started asking about why that's so important. What are we talking about that's so important that I can't prioritize my time with him? And I said, well, you know, we're here talking about, you know, how do we get the next 10 years right? How do we build the future, the world that we want? And really the technology and the solutions that are going to deliver that. And he actually got that, and he was like, that sounds actually pretty cool. And, you know, maybe there's some interesting things that he could do in that space. And I really feel that semiconductors, they are a core part of that because they underpin everything.
Yes, thanks, Sarge. Obviously, semiconductors are part of our everyday lives nowadays. So, Stephen, turning to you, it's a very important day for Arm, as we know. We can't talk about that, but hopefully today will go very well for you. But what do you see as one of the key successes for industry and government in rolling out this strategy?
I mean, I think you have to back up a bit, and I think you have to look at the UK government's strategy in part in terms of what it doesn't do, as well as what it does do. So what the British government has decided is that they're not going to have the ambition that the Biden administration has or the European Commission has of trying to create more high-end chip manufacturing capability in the UK. They have decided, A, that's very expensive, B, they're not entirely convinced it's absolutely necessary. So what they've decided to do instead is to try to focus on some specific, specialized areas, both technological areas, but also areas of the supply chain, where they reckon, with a bit of help, the UK has a real chance of succeeding. And their aim in this really is to make sure that in the debates that are to come about the semiconductor supply chain, the UK has a seat at the table because it's contributing to that. Now, of course, if it was easy to determine where can the UK aspire to be the next let's say, the next Taiwan. I'm not going to say UK aspires to be the next Taiwan completely, but what niche area is it that the UK could aspire to be the next Taiwan in? It's easy to ask the question. It's actually very difficult to get to the answer. And what the strategy, I think, rather sensibly does is set in place a series of actions and investigations and scoping studies to try to bottom out what it is they should focus on. So my advice to the government would be, get this going now. Let's narrow down on the one or two key things where the UK could actually make a real difference going forward. Now, if you're asking me what they might be, they're obviously going to be, I think, in the design area or the prototyping area or possibly advanced packaging. But, if you look ahead, heterogeneous computing, the bringing together of different cores and how they can work together, that's going to be a major step going forward. And it's an area where the UK could reasonably expect to have some strength. Why not government bring the universities together, get them to start to work on that, bring the companies together, bring the incubators together, and see whether you can't create a niche, a specialist niche in an area like that.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Charles, turning to you. So behind the scenes, in preparation for the strategy, there's been quite a few of us involved in the CHIPS Coalition, led by Russ Shaw, who's with us here, advising the government around this strategy. And one of the areas that's been picked up in the strategy is around startups and SMEs and their access to funding and tools and things like that. So from your experience, what's critical about this strategy, and what do we need to do as an industry to support startups?
So I think you can hear me, right? Just checking. Good. So I think from my point of view, and we represent 280 companies across semiconductor and microelectronics in the UK. They are startups, small to medium-sized enterprises, 10, 20-year-old companies, and some foreign companies with significant activity in the UK. And I think if you look across that whole sector, the strategy is largely around early-stage design and innovation, which, to Stephen's point, is really valuable, and we are very good at that. I think we used to have a bigger sector in the UK maybe 20 years ago than we do now, and a lot of activity and investment has moved west to the US, and also, of course, towards Asia. But I think we're at a point now where the industry is changing. And again, backing up what Stephen said, if you look at what major global companies are doing in terms of chips going forward, they're more interested in mixed technologies, so-called compound semiconductor, photonics, moving away actually from super tiny geometries, because you actually only need them in super high volume, high performance chips for mobile phones and laptops. And when you look at the new areas of quantum, photonics, IoT, robotics, augmented reality, the technologies used to build those chips are going to be a mixture of different new materials and compound technologies, which actually we have a lot of capability in the UK. So to answer your question, Susan, I think that the government is right to focus initially the strategy on early stage innovation and new technologies. But here's the but. Number one, I think the government needs to not, it needs to be patient, and it needs to not give in too soon, because it's going to take a decade plus to build success and growth in this area. And secondly, we need to not forget the ecosystem and build out other areas, for example, prototyping and specialist manufacturing, not just the design piece. Because, of course, as we see, you have a great design company with a good idea, and they got bought by a foreign company overseas, and then it kind of disappears from the UK landscape.
Yeah, I completely agree with Charles. I think what kind of gives me a bit of optimism about, because I think the point actually about the fact that this can't just be about, okay, great, we've finally announced a distinct strategy for this industry, and that's it, but we clearly, everyone knows, in the next 12, 18 months we might be facing a bit of a more political upheaval. But this is such an important sector that it needs to kind of sustain and endure throughout that. What kind of gives me optimism in that is the kind of interlinkages with broader science and technology priorities, both from a kind of growth perspective for the UK, but also from a national security perspective. So, for example, in the National Cyber Strategy, there's a whole program of work around the UK trying to foster technology advantage. So these are doubling down in the strengths that the UK uniquely has. Charles has just referenced a couple of them, like quantum, in areas where we've got deep science and technological research expertise in this country, and actually kind of dominating that space, or the key value aspects of that space, such that we can, maintain our strategic advantage over the long term. Semiconductors is one of those areas. And therefore there are programs of work that are driving forward some of the outcomes that are actually specified in the semiconductor strategy through other government initiatives already. So there is momentum underway. More broadly as well, we've got other kind of innovation, science and technology related strategies and programs of work, such as, things around the space strategy, the quantum strategy, the AI strategy. Like these things I think will help in terms of making this momentum and this focus and this investment sticky beyond the kind of the next 18, 24 months.
Thanks, Suzanne. I want to make a point about why should the government bother doing any of this, really? I mean, it's great because we've got an audience here of well-informed, engaged people who know about the sector, and that's fine. But if we had an audience of people who knew nothing about the sector, I can see someone putting their hand up and saying, you're using a lot of words we don't understand, you're basically putting a lot of government effort that's only going to create jobs for boffins, the sort of people we cold-shouldered when we were at school. Why should we bother about any of that? And my broad point is really this. It's that, and it seems bizarre, but it is actually true. Computing and certainly programming, I won't break it down into engineering and programming, but in general, computing, in my view, is a massive instrument, or can be a massive instrument, of social mobility. Because actually, you don't need to have come from a family that's got a lot of books and always has conversations around a dinner table. You don't need to have come from, a family that's really, really pushed you. You don't need to have come from an education that's made you confident and, chipper about yourself and your prospects. You can find your way into computing, and the world's your oyster. Blah blah blah. An example from I know, of a person who left school at 16, went into learning how to be a baker, and after a few years thought, I can't do this forever. So took himself back to an FE college, did computer programming, turned out unexpectedly to be really good at it, ended up working for Intel, and ended up actually working for ARM, but I don't want anyone to trace who he was. But, and this is an example of how this, so when people say to me, isn't this all just you boffins creating jobs for each other and whatnot, and a few financial engineers doing well out of it at the same time? Actually, it's not. If we can build a society where we are proud of, committed to, and focused on developing innovative technology, it can actually benefit a lot more people than you might think.
Actually, I'd like to jump on that if I can. I think one of the major issues we have in this country as a societal problem is that people don't either recognize the financial opportunity on a personal level, even to go and start a business and build something and make something amazing happen around technology, or indeed just from the perspective of a user of technology in the street being excited about the technology behind that. I have a 15-year-old son. He loves technology. He's not really interested in why and how it does what it does. But I think, if you walk down the street in San Francisco, you're going to find a lot more people in the street that are connected, get it, and see why both it's financially valuable and societally valuable. And that's a mind shift I think we need to move in this country.
And if I may say so, not just San Francisco. I mean, Taiwan, China, India, all of those countries that are really growing, they've got it. They've got this passion, enthusiasm, curiosity about it, which we need to maintain and sustain in the UK.
I completely...
Oh, still not working. Okay, I thought they might have fixed it, but no. So it seems such a pity to me that we have computers in our pockets made possible by ARM and 30 years of an ecosystem in the UK. And yet in the UK, the culture isn't the same as it is elsewhere. So part of this tech strategy is around education, skills, and pipeline. So perhaps Charles or Stephen or Sarge, do you want to pick up on how we as an industry can create a little bit more glamour around the geekiness and nerdiness of working in semiconductors in the UK? So how are we going to do that as an industry?
Yeah,
For me, that's quite important.
I think government needs to do something, but I think industry needs to. I often find myself saying to companies, look, it's great to have a dialogue with government and say, look, we need help, we need this, we need. But actually, let's start with what we can do together with it to help ourselves, right? And I think one of those is absolutely, I don't know quite what the answer is, but, you know, we need to have a program of marketing and events, mindshare, I don't know, ambassadors even, you know, to get out there and show the world, show the country why this is important.
I think I completely agree, and I think Stephen has started to land on it. Actually, this is about the excitement of the opportunity, right? And in the things that are genuinely going to change the world for our children, you know, for the future. I think, you know, at the moment there's a real opportunity to capture the zeitgeist of the climate emergency, and the you know, the opportunity really to drive through new technologically enabled solutions that are powered by these innovations that we're trying to talk about and trying to drive forward. They're going to make a difference. They're going to create new jobs that don't even exist yet. But I do think the language point that Charles makes is really important. So we've seen this in some of our work at Plexal, in other deep technology domains, where there's almost like an inherent challenge in a sector which is trying to evolve itself to meet the new future, where you're using jargon and terminology that engages a very small subset of the economy really deeply, but also doesn't necessarily engage, or rather disengages a vast majority, because it's not relevant. We need to make this relevant to everyone and society as a whole.
Yes, over dinner last night, we talked a lot about, we had dinner last night, talked about linking semiconductor technology with net zero campaigns, with privacy and security, which you mentioned early on, about using the ecosystem of technology investment to leverage something, you know, quite niche, which is semiconductors, but really quite important for UK industry. So on the ecosystem point, Stephen, how important has ecosystem been for ARM, and how important is it going to be moving forward to really develop the semiconductor strategy?
I don't want to sound rude, but I'm going to ignore that for a second, because I'm very keen to make another point. But we've wandered way off the subject of the strategy, but I'll come on to ecosystem. And I did want to make a point about the broad culture, because I'm on a bit of a crusade here. I mean, and I suspect most of the people I can see are what I would describe as tech optimists. We believe that by and large, tech will deliver good for us. But actually, certainly in the UK, and I think this is one of the problems, and I think in Europe actually, one of the problems is that quite a lot of what used to be called the chattering classes, quite a lot of the people who are not involved in tech, but, you know, love to chew these things over around dinner and whatnot, they're not tech optimists, they're tech skeptics. They go first for the risks. And a whole sort of, I might be treading on people's toes here, a whole cluster of NGOs has grown up whose main job in life is to highlight the risks. And if you keep highlighting the risks, you don't get anywhere. Now, I don't want to sound like I believe we should just go for it and not care what the damage is. Obviously, we need to calibrate what we do and make sure that people trust it and we bring the people with us. But until we can change the terms of that debate, you won't get the enthusiasm for technology. Ecosystem is, of course, vitally important. So I'll answer Suzanne's question. I mean, you know, our ARM as a company wouldn't be what it is without a pretty large ecosystem of other companies, large and small, who have worked with us, have worked on ARM technology, know it, know how to use it, can act as the interface between us and other companies, can develop new ideas on it, and so on and so forth. I mean, when I come to a place like this, I'm absolutely amazed, I'll be honest, at the number of companies I've never heard of. They're all in this room. They're relatively small companies. They are all doing something important, niche, and specialist. And that is one of the unique things about the sector. It can spawn, it can give rise to a vast army of an ecosystem of small companies, some of whom will do very well, some of whom will do less well, but they'll all make a contribution to the tech revolution.
So we bet before this panel that we would only agree with each other. So I'm specifically going to disagree with Stephen on something that he just said. So apologies. But I should say, Plexal is not an NGO that only highlights the risk, but we are an innovation company that helps people address the risk to unlock the opportunities. So take my next statement in that spirit in mind. I think it's really important to highlight the risks of future technology at the moment, because we're not just talking about consumer electronics, consumer applications. We're talking about breakthrough technologies that are fundamentally going to change how we interact with machines and how how our brains adapt to the technology-enabled environment around us. And there are some really big risks associated with that. I think we need to almost slow down a little bit to go fast ahead. And actually, things such as the AI summit, which is coming up at the beginning of November, I think that is an important stock take for technology as a whole at the moment, because the old mantra of you've got to just move fast, it's okay if you break things, it will all come good in the end. I don't think that's acceptable anymore. And I think for all of us who play our roles in the technology ecosystem, in the supply chain, it's not okay to be passive on this stuff anymore. Like, we've got to be collectively active and collaborate around those risks so that we develop appropriate solutions that have the right incentives around them too.
So actually, can I just say, I think I agree with both of you. Is that possible?
We want the drama, though, Charles.
Yeah.
We're trying to get
a bit of drama. Well,
going.
I think AI is a particular concern, right? And I think what we're good at in the UK, actually, to talk about the UK sector, we're good at systems, end-to-end, looking at the bigger picture. And I think we're very good at working together to try to put forward some kind of standards or processes or stopgaps, right? And so there are a number of activities. We're running an interest group right now, actually in partnership with Innovate UK, around trustworthy AI. And we're trying to get people around the table to say, how do we not just write requirements, but how do we engineer? How does an engineer who's creating neural network models and building out an AI system, how can they try to build into that engineering process safeguards to ensure that somehow this is going to be trustworthy, ethical, non-biased, et cetera, I also wanted to make the point that I think, bouncing off what both of you just said, that the future, the direction of travel around all these technologies we've talked about so far, and semiconductors, which underpins all of this, I think we are heading into a new world order, if I may, where there are going to be winners and losers. And back in the day of anybody remember globalization from a few years ago? It was great because we were all talking to each other. It was very much driven by commercial business interests. But generally, most countries had something to offer. We got around the table, we figured it out. But what's happening now is that, and it isn't just China and America, but numerous countries around the world are making strategic plays by investing and distorting the commercial playing field and saying, we are going to be number one in quantum. We're going to be number one in AI. So in a way, if we don't up our game in the UK and really double down, we are going to be on the back foot here. And I just think that's something we need to keep in mind.
Can I just pick up on the trust bit? And just tell, I mean, I've had this idea for a while, and I can't, to be honest, I can't seem to get anyone else terribly interested in it, but I'm going to try have another go today.
And here's the place to do it, for sure.
Well, there's all these small companies, because that's the point, right? So, trustworthy AI, and it was your point about how can you make sure that the engineer is working on a small bit of it somewhere. And my thought, it was based on something I once worked on a few years ago. I worked on what are called in the UK dodgy diamonds. This is diamonds that were the profit from which was fueling conflict, mostly but not entirely in Africa. And we put together a scheme whereby each diamond is accompanied essentially by a certificate that tells you it comes from a trusted mine, it hasn't been used to fuel conflict, it's blah, 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 blah. And that certificate accompanies it on its journey, essentially from the mine to the engagement ring, or whatever it is you want to use diamonds. So if you buy a diamond in a shop, you can be confident you're not supporting conflict somewhere in the world. And it's that chain of assurances model which I think might help as we move forward on AI, and particularly if we hope to bring a lot of companies working in the AI ecosystem. So the idea would be quite simply that companies who are producing something for the AI ecosystem issue voluntarily a statement saying, these are the, let's call them ethical risks we identified with our bit of the chain, and this is what we've done about it. And so by the time you got to an AI product being put on the market, the person putting it on the market would have behind it, if you like, a collection, a suite, a chain of assurances from all those people that had, you know, designed the chip, trained the data, finished the product, saying what were the ethical risks they'd identified and what they had tried to do about it. Now, it may not be foolproof, but it will begin to get everybody focused on their own individual responsibility in that supply chain.
Thanks.
Free idea, anyone can pick it up and run with it.
Thanks, Stephen. I've just written that down. I'm gonna...
Yeah, and do you know a patent attorney in the room at all who can protect it for you? So, Charles, we've talked a lot about ecosystem. We've talked a lot about supply chain. We briefly touched on startups and SMEs who are very critically highlighted in the report. How difficult is it in the UK to start a business in the semiconductor space and access that global supply chain we've been hearing about?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a good question. So I have been involved in a couple of startups, as you know, in the past. I think there's different phases to it, and it depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, the short answer is yes, it's hard, right? So typically, if you want to start up, you have a funky idea for a new chip, Stephen's idea, for example, maybe, and you want to build a team, you're going to design it, you're going to need to get a prototype chip manufactured because you can't, even if you want to license IP like ARM, you've still got to have a working chip to show the customer that it's going to work, right? No one's going to take your IP and build it into their product unless you've already shown them it works in an end chip. So either way around, you're still going to build the chip. If you're looking and, you know, shoestring startup with 4 or 5 guys working 24/7, it's going to take you a year to a year and a half to get to the point where you're ready to go and get the chip prototype manufactured. And so obviously you've got to live for that long, and you're going to spend probably many hundreds of K, 300-400K cheapest to get the chip made. You've got to pay for all the design tools along that route. And the EDA software tools to design chips are very expensive, read hundreds of K per year. And if you need IP, which you probably will, because nobody wants to reinvent the wheel, so you're going to have a couple of processor cores from ARM, you might have some memory cells from somebody else, and you put it all together like Lego bricks, right? Sounds quite easy, doesn't it? So typically what you see for kind of pre-seed or seed funding for a chip startup so they can get to that prototype silicon is in the region of £1 to £2 million, right? If you were trying to do a software company to get to a kind of a beta software release, I don't know, it's probably about 300 or 400K, right?
Or half a day with ChatGPT.
Or half a day with ChatGPT, yeah. Apparently ChatGPT will design chips now too, so I'm told. Anyhow, but then, and I think in many ways, in the UK, that early stage investment community is not so bad anymore, right? There are companies like Block Ventures, there's Cambridge Deep Tech Labs, the Cambridge Innovation Capital, Edinburgh Innovation. There are companies around that will invest in, there's not many, but there are some. But you know, it's not easy. But the next level is the scale up to Series A, where I've got my prototype chip, I've got 3 or 4 guys around the world, and this is important because although you may start in the UK, the semiconductor market industry is global. So you want to be selling to companies in the UK if you can, especially when you're small, but ultimately you're going to be selling on a global stage, competing globally to global customers. Series A is where you're going to get the next 5 to 10 million pounds, which is what you now need to go to someone like TSMC and scale up into volumes of millions, if not tens of millions, if not 50 million plus, to then become a serious business. And even then, you're still not profitable. So you're looking probably 7 to 8 years for break even as a profitable chip company, by which time you'll have probably had about 15 to 20 million pound of funding.
Yeah, I'd just come in on that. I mean, despite us being an innovation-friendly nation, things are certainly stacked against you as an entrepreneur, particularly in this space. And I think, I mean, some of the things that Charles just mentioned, I guess we've seen this a little bit with some of our broader work in the tech ecosystem. So working with founders who are trying to develop solutions, for example, cyber solutions, which increasingly actually are hardware enabled. So you might, you could look at them one way and they could be a cyber company. You could look at them the other way and they could be a semiconductor company. They're reliant upon this technology to deliver their kind of, their value proposition. But it's really difficult to find their fit in that, because sometimes I feel, particularly in an area that we've had such kind of legacy success as a country, such as semiconductors, it's hard to break in from the outside, because there are angel groups, there are investors out there, there are networks of knowledge available, but they're typically closed networks. We need to open those up, and I think the role of clustering in that, in bringing together the kind of diverse communities, leveraging kind of locational strength, places where you can bring people together and share knowledge and transfer that knowledge, build new networks that are kind of, they like leverage that network effect and that knowledge transfer, I think is really important. From an investment side, I think one of the risks that we face as well in terms of the narrative around innovation as a country is that, look, we've championed a lot of the kind of the less deep technical successes of investment. So, the SaaS company that raises some crazy round of £250 million, with a prototype product, because of, let's be honest, the kind of anomalous returns that a SaaS business will give you as an investor. The reality is, with the types of challenges that we need to solve in the world today through technology, we need a different approach to how you invest in technology, and really a different set of skills in the investment community, which I do believe is starting to happen. And certainly the investment community is starting to wake up to that. But there needs to be some effort there, I think, as well. Lastly, I think the skills of this ecosystem is something that concerns me. When people talk about digital skills generally, but again, it's easy to take a really kind of narrow view of that, talk about people who can code and what have you. In this space, you need real engineering understanding. You need to understand physics to a degree. There's some really hard skills that you need, which are not in abundance. And we need to find a way to kind of bring that back a little bit, or share that knowledge, particularly as, the people who have kind of pioneered that first wave of success for the UK in this space, they're getting older, right? And we can't lose that. You lose that kind of currency of understanding.
Thanks, Sarge. Stephen, how hard is it for Arm to recruit in the UK? And is it getting tougher? Is it getting easier? And what are the barriers to recruitment for special skills?
Well, Arm, I think, is in a remarkable position, really, in that I'll stick my neck out, but almost everybody anywhere in the world who has studied computer engineering will know of Arm. So it's not like we have to go and find people and explain what we do and say, would you be prepared to come to Cambridge and work for us? I mean, we are in a very fortunate position. And one of the points which I made it to British officials in the course of the discussions on visas and so on is that Arm will always want to recruit the best people from all over the world. So Arm is not in a position of saying, we want to recruit in the UK, therefore, please can the British education system deliver better computer scientists? That may turn out to be a good thing, but actually we will still want to recruit the even better computer scientists that are coming from another part of the world. So, there are always vacancies at Arm, nearly always vacancies at Arm, but we don't struggle to get people to come and want to work for us. Now, I accept that in some sectors, that is, for some companies, that is much harder. We're also in Cambridge, which is a nice place. People will like to come and work and live there. But it's quite expensive.
Apart from the cost of housing, though.
The cost of housing is very expensive. But that's what happens if you create a cluster. I mean, I will divert a bit onto some of the things that Sad was just talking about. There is a lot of talk about how if you really want to drive the tech sector, you need a cluster. And so, people say a university town, you need well-educated people, you need small companies, you need a large anchor company, and so on and so forth. And that may very well be true. But the trouble with the cluster theory is, if I can put it loosely, is that everybody knows the ingredients, but no one knows the recipe. So yeah, we need skills. Yeah, we need IP protection. Yeah, we need a university, or good university, or good access to intellectual firepower. But no one knows how much of this do we need for each of these things, and what comes first, and when do you start to give it all a good stir with a dash of finance involved. It's very, very hard to work out what the recipe is for some of this success. I remember Herman Hauser, who was anyway early involved in ARM, is now an investor. When asked about the secret of creating a cluster, tech cluster, and he's also based in Cambridge, he said it's quite simple. You build a university and you wait 800 years, and of course none of us has got that time.
So we need to wait another 800 years for
I
next ARM to come
I don't
along.
think we should be trapped by the past. I'm a tech optimist. I think we should be driving this forward and thinking afresh.
I am a tech optimist too. However, there are certain geopolitical headwinds heading our way. How are those going to affect the UK's semiconductor strategy in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Can I pick that up? I just want to make a comment I should have made earlier. In terms of the innovation piece and what it takes to build a chip company, I should say, I think that the strategy document does make a good effort around that early stage innovation piece. So off the back of that document, there is already an initiative right now that's been kicked off by an organization called Silicon Catalyst, working for DCIT, and they have an early stage incubator program where if you have a good idea and you get through the vetting, you will get free access to all of those tools and IP I was talking about earlier to enable you to build your prototype, right? And that effectively, I mean, not for everybody, it's a selection process, but it gives you, you guys in the audience, if you've got a good idea, check it out, Silicon Catalyst. It gives you the chance to try and build your prototype and see if you can get your company off the ground, right? And I think initiatives like that are really important to start building the innovation capability. But like I said earlier, there's still then a problem about how you scale it up later on. And that feeds nicely into your question about geopolitical headwinds, because as I said earlier, other countries, and China is, there are various graphs floating around the industry where people look at what is the kind of net contribution by government into the semiconductor industry per country. And there are some shocking numbers of 50% subsidy in China, 40% subsidy in America. Even if we break it down to countries you might not imagine, like Spain, Germany, France, Australia, there's a lot of emphasis on governments putting money into the sector. Now, it doesn't necessarily follow that if you throw a load of money at the industry, good things are going to happen. You've got to be smart. And I think, we have to cut our cloth accordingly in the UK, and we need to be smart. But these are the things we're up against. And we're up against it because those countries recognize, I wanted to say this, I'll say it now, semiconductors are the new oil, right? That's what this is about. If you go forward, I'm a big sci-fi fan. I think if you go forward 30, 40 years into the future, we're all going to be having chips under our skin. We won't have phones. They'll be implanted in here. Augmented reality will be you won't be able to live in society without chips in you.
Oh no!
Can I just jump in there on the geopolitical angle? So it's an interesting point. So Charles mentioned globalization earlier. So I don't think we're going through de-globalization. I think we're going through another phase of globalization, re-globalization, if you will. So there's a lot of organizations, big enterprises, in whichever industry, if they operate internationally, they're thinking about their supply chains. And they're thinking about how do we create more resiliency into our supply chains. That's an important component of this strategy as well. It's one of the top 3 objectives that's set out, which talks about more resilient supply chains for this because it's critical technology, and also the other critical technologies it underpins, safeguarding our national security strategic advantage and growing the economy. So yes, there is clearly going to be a geopolitical effect. Next year, 2024, we've been hearing a lot at COGX this week about how potentially impactful from a geopolitical perspective, the things going on in the US with the US election, Taiwanese elections. There's all sorts of kind of democratic processes underway next year, which could affect this market. But I think the opportunity actually is something that I heard Sir Alex Younger, the former chief of MI6, say the other day in his talk at CogX, where he recalled a conversation with his Chinese counterpart. And his Chinese counterpart apparently said that the West will win anything that requires decentralization and distribution, like that. That's where, you know, the West and will win that race. Anything that requires centralization is where, you know, an autocratic regime will win that race. And I think what we're seeing in this industry is a bit of that. Like, we're seeing more distribution of key manufacturing facilities around the world. I think this is where the smart thing about our strategy and how it interlinks with the things Germany are doing, for example, in massive investment into manufacturing, us doubling down on the higher value-added aspects of the supply chain. You know, people can, various different areas which are kind of values aligned to us, can dominate in individual spaces, which actually overall creates a more resilient supply chain. So I'm generally quite optimistic, actually, because I feel like our strategy fits in to the bit. We're not going to dominate with the capital sums being invested in the US and elsewhere, but we can succeed in the spaces where we have a unique advantage. And I feel like this is directly targeted at that, and it integrates well with our partners. We have international alliances that are coming online that will enable those relationships to thrive and prosper. So hopefully we can navigate through those geopolitical headwinds and come out the other side successfully.
Well said. So we only have a couple of minutes left, unfortunately. I could sit here and listen to these three for hours, as I've done many times before, I should say. I know them all very well. But I just want to give everyone on the panel an opportunity to wrap up. Is there anything in this strategy that we haven't talked about? Anything that surprised you? Anything that shouldn't be here? Anything that is of critical importance? Anybody want to just make their final comments while we have a few minutes left?
Okay, I'll pick up on Sarge's point there, and I will sum up by saying I think the strategy is a good start. It's focused on early stage innovation R&D. I think with Sarge's point in mind, we need to find our position in the world working with like-minded other countries. But my concern is that we need to maintain credibility and relevance at the top table, and thereby not just do the design piece, but make sure, for example, we have manufacturing in maybe photonics or other materials where we can build our own longer term capability. For me, it's about ecosystem. And actually, we haven't talked a lot about skills, but the skills piece will come from an ecosystem when school leavers can look at companies like Arm and go, wow, I want to work in that company, so I'm going to go do engineering at university.
Sarge, Stephen, any final comments?
Well, on the strategy, I mean, I would actually urge people just to read the summary of the strategy, because it's actually pretty thorough, and I think it raises a whole lot of issues. On geopolitics, my one piece of advice is essentially don't panic. It's a very English piece of advice. But the worst we could do globally is to persuade ourselves that somehow this is a zero-sum game and there will be winners and losers. And that would be catastrophic. We mustn't think of it like that. Again, you know, the globalized supply chain for technology has delivered enormous success for the whole sector, and we should really try not to jeopardize it if we can.
Yeah, I was going to say a similar thing, but less eloquently than Stephen, which is it can't be about competition. It has to be about collaboration. We have to be working with our international partners. You know, we need to integrate our supply chains in a different way. We need to facilitate the transfer of talent effectively across different kind of centers of gravity in this space. I think that's really, really important.
Okay, so thank you to our fabulous panel today. Thank you to all of you for listening. And I'm just going to hand back over to Julia.
Yeah, so thank you very much. A round of applause for the panel. Thank you very much. Thank you.